The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Windermere Palace as King Alexander stood at the tall windows of his private study. His weathered hands gripped the morning newspaper, the headlines screaming accusations that made his stomach turn. For 43 years, he had ruled the kingdom of Valdoria with dignity and grace. But today felt different. Today, everything he had built seemed to be crumbling around him. Queen Isabella had been his companion for 28 years of marriage, a union that began as a political arrangement, but had grown into something deeper. She was not his first love, but she had become his anchor through countless storms. Her family, the Montclairs, had been instrumental in securing his throne during the turbulent early years of his reign. They had provided financial backing, political connections, and unwavering loyalty when other noble houses questioned his right to rule. But now, as Alexander read the damning reports spread across the front pages, he realized that the very family he had trusted most had been systematically betraying him for years. The Montclairs had been selling state secrets to neighboring kingdoms, manipulating trade agreements for their personal gain, and, worst of all, they had been planning to overthrow him in favor of Isabella's younger brother, Duke Ferdinand. The evidence was overwhelming. Secret documents found in Duke Ferdinand's estate revealed years of correspondence with foreign agents. Bank records showed suspicious transfers of millions from the royal treasury to private Montclair accounts. Photographs captured clandestine meetings between Isabella's sister, Lady Catherine, and known enemies of the crown. The intelligence service had been investigating for months, and now they had presented Alexander with a file so damaging that it could destroy not just the Montclairs, but the very foundation of his marriage. Alexander's mind raced back to the warning signs he had chosen to ignore. Isabella's frequent unexplained absences, her family's growing influence in palace affairs, and their increasing demands for more power and privileges. He had attributed these things to natural family ambitions, never imagining the depth of their treachery. The man who had once trusted too easily now faced the hardest decision of his life. The study door opened quietly, and Isabella entered wearing her customary morning dress of deep blue silk. Her auburn hair was perfectly arranged, and her green eyes sparkled with the same warmth that had first captivated him decades ago. She carried a silver tray with his preferred breakfast tea, a ritual they had shared almost every morning of their marriage. "Good morning, my dear," she said softly, setting the tray on his desk. "You look troubled. Is everything all right?" Alexander studied her face carefully, searching for any sign that she knew what was coming. Her expression remained serene, innocent even. Either she was completely unaware of her family's actions, or she was a far better actress than he had ever imagined. The possibility that she might be involved in the conspiracy felt like a dagger to his heart. "Isabella," he began carefully, "we need to discuss your family." Something flickered across her features then, so briefly that he almost missed it. Fear? Guilt? Or simply confusion? She sat down gracefully in the chair opposite his desk, folding her hands in her lap with practiced elegance. "Of course, Alexander. What about them?" Her voice remained steady, but he noticed the slight tension in her shoulders. He slid the intelligence file across the desk toward her. The photographs on top showed her brother Ferdinand shaking hands with General Marcos, the military leader of their long-standing rival nation, Astoria. The timestamp showed the meeting had occurred just 3 weeks ago, during what Ferdinand had claimed was a hunting trip. Isabella's face went white as she examined the images. Her hands began to tremble as she turned through page after page of evidence. Bank statements, coded messages, meeting transcripts, surveillance photos. The case against her family was ironclad and devastating. "This cannot be real," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Ferdinand would never, my family would never." But, as she continued reading, Alexander watched her composure crumble. Tears began streaming down her cheeks as the full scope of her family's betrayal became clear. Whether those tears were from genuine shock or from being caught, he could not tell. 28 years, Isabella," Alexander said quietly. 28 years I have trusted your family implicitly. I gave them positions of power, access to state secrets, control over significant portions of our military and economy. And this is how they repay that trust." Isabella looked up from the documents, her eyes pleading. "Alexander, I swear to you, I knew nothing about this. Nothing at all. You have to believe me." He wanted to believe her. Everything in his heart screamed to trust the woman who had stood by his side through every crisis, who had borne his children and shared his dreams. But his duty as king demanded that he consider every possibility, including the one that would destroy him personally. The evidence suggests this conspiracy has been in motion for at least 5 years, Alexander continued, his voice becoming more formal as he shifted into his role as sovereign rather than husband. During that time, you have had regular contact with all the primary conspirators. You have attended their private meetings, traveled with them frequently, and had access to the same classified information they have been selling to our enemies. But I never paid attention to their political discussions. Isabella protested, rising from her chair. You know how I am with such matters. I focus on charitable work, cultural events, family affairs. I leave the politics to you and the council. Alexander remembered this about her, and it had always been both endearing and occasionally frustrating. Isabella had never shown much interest in the complexities of statecraft, preferring to dedicate her time to art patronage and social causes. But now he wondered if that apparent disinterest had been carefully cultivated to deflect suspicion. The king rose and walked to the window again, gazing out at the palace gardens where his grandchildren often played. Those children carried Montclair blood. His own heir, Prince Marcus, was half Montclair. The implications of this scandal stretched far beyond his marriage into the very succession of the throne. What are you going to do? Isabella asked quietly from behind him. Alexander closed his eyes and felt the weight of the crown he had worn for more than 4 decades. The decision he made in the next few hours would define not only the remainder of his reign, but the future of the kingdom itself. The Montclairs had been a powerful family long before his marriage to Isabella, and they had allies throughout the nobility and military. Moving against them would be dangerous, but allowing their treachery to continue would be catastrophic. I am going to cut all ties, he said finally, his voice resolute. Every single member of your family will be stripped of their titles, their positions, and their access to the palace. The assets they have stolen will be recovered, and those directly involved in the conspiracy will face charges of high treason. Isabella gasped, pressing her hand to her throat. Alexander, please, think about what you are saying. These are not just my family members. They are your in-laws, the grandparents of your children, people who have served the crown for decades. People who have betrayed the crown for decades, Alexander corrected firmly. The evidence is clear, Isabella. Your family has been systematically working to undermine my rule and steal from our people. I cannot, and will not allow sentiment to compromise my duty as king. The queen sank back into her chair, the reality of the situation finally settling upon her. Her entire world was about to collapse. The family she had always turned to for support and guidance would be branded as traitors. The social circle she had moved in for nearly 3 decades would be closed to her. The charitable organizations she patronized would distance themselves from the scandal. What about me? She whispered. What about our marriage? This was the question Alexander had been dreading most. The investigation had not found direct evidence of Isabella's involvement in the conspiracy, but it had also not definitively cleared her. More importantly, even if she was innocent, her loyalty would always be divided between her husband and her family. How could he trust her completely when her own blood had proven so untrustworthy? That, Alexander said slowly, is something we will have to determine together. But I want you to understand, Isabella, that my duty to this kingdom comes before everything else, including our personal relationship. If I discover that you had any knowledge of your family's activities, or if you attempt to interfere with the justice they will face, then our marriage will be over. The finality in his voice seemed to break something inside Isabella. She began to sob uncontrollably, her composed royal demeanor finally shattered completely. For the first time since their wedding day, Alexander looked at his wife and saw not a queen, but a frightened woman whose entire world was falling apart. Yet even as his heart ached for her pain, the king in him remained unmoved. The kingdom of Valdoria had survived civil wars, foreign invasions, economic collapses, and natural disasters. It would survive the Montclair betrayal as well, but only if he had the strength to make the hard choices that leadership demanded. The morning sun continued to stream through the palace windows, but for King Alexander and Queen Isabella, the darkness of a long and terrible day was just beginning. Within hours of Alexander's devastating revelation, the palace became a fortress of controlled chaos. Royal guards moved with silent efficiency through the corridors, while intelligence officers coordinated the largest security operation in recent memory. The king had given orders that were both swift and merciless. All Montclair family members were to be immediately stripped of their palace access, their government positions terminated, and their assets frozen pending investigation. Queen Isabella remained in the royal quarters, her world collapsing around her as she tried to process the magnitude of what was happening. The woman who had woken that morning as one of the most powerful figures in the kingdom now found herself essentially under house arrest, her every movement monitored, her communications restricted. Alexander had not yet decided whether to consider her a victim of her family's deception or a potential accomplice, but until that determination was made, she would be treated with careful suspicion. The first casualty of Alexander's decisive action was Duke Ferdinand himself. Palace guards arrived at his estate before noon, finding him in his study reviewing what appeared to be encrypted communications with foreign contacts. The arrest was swift and public, with news cameras capturing the dramatic moment when the king's own brother-in-law was led away in restraints. The images would dominate headlines for days to come, sending shockwaves throughout the kingdom and neighboring nations. Lady Catherine, Isabella's sister and the director of cultural affairs, was removed from her office while in the middle of a meeting with foreign dignitaries. The embarrassment was intentional and calculated. Alexander wanted to send a clear message that no position, no matter how seemingly innocent, would protect those who had betrayed the crown. Catherine's tears and protests of innocence fell on deaf ears as security personnel escorted her from the palace she had called home for over 2 decades. But it was the arrest of Count Wilhelm Montclair, Isabella's elderly father, that truly demonstrated the king's resolve. The 78-year-old patriarch of the family had served as an advisor to 3 different monarchs and was widely respected throughout the kingdom. However, the evidence showed that he had been the architect of the conspiracy, using his decades of experience and connections to orchestrate the systematic betrayal of the crown. When guards arrived at his ancestral home, Count Wilhelm was found burning documents in his fireplace. The papers that survived the flames revealed the true scope of the family's treachery. Detailed plans for a coup that would have placed Ferdinand on the throne, financial records showing the theft of nearly 50 million from the royal treasury, and correspondence with enemy agents dating back 6 years. The old man's arrest was perhaps the most shocking moment of the entire affair. Count Wilhelm had been like a father to Alexander in the early years of his reign, providing guidance and wisdom when the young king had desperately needed both. To discover that this trusted mentor had been plotting against him for years felt like the cruelest betrayal of all. As news of the arrest spread throughout the kingdom, public reaction was explosive and divided. Many citizens were outraged by the Montclair family's betrayal, seeing it as an unforgivable violation of the trust placed in them. These supporters rallied behind King Alexander, praising his decisive action and calling for the conspirators to face the full penalty of the law. However, a significant portion of the population remained loyal to the Montclair family, who had been generous patrons of numerous charitable causes and had cultivated a reputation for caring about ordinary citizens. These supporters refused to believe the accusations, claiming that the evidence had been fabricated as part of a power struggle within the royal family. The most vocal defender of the Montclairs was Duchess Margaret, Ferdinand's wife, who held an impromptu press conference outside the palace gates. With tears streaming down her face, she declared her husband's innocence and accused King Alexander of orchestrating an elaborate frame-up to eliminate political rivals. "My husband has served this kingdom faithfully for 30 years, Duchess Margaret proclaimed to the gathered crowd and cameras. He would never betray King Alexander, whom he has always regarded as a brother. This is nothing more than a cruel attempt to destroy our family, because certain people fear our influence and popularity with the common people." Her passionate defense resonated with many who had admired the Montclair family's charitable work and public service. Protests began forming outside the palace, with hundreds of citizens demanding the release of the arrested family members and calling for an independent investigation into the allegations. Meanwhile, within the palace walls, Queen Isabella struggled with the personal devastation of watching her entire family being branded as traitors. The isolation was suffocating. Her children, Prince Marcus and Princess Elena, were forbidden from visiting her until the investigation was complete. Her ladies-in-waiting had been reassigned, her personal staff replaced with palace personnel loyal only to the king. The woman who had once commanded the respect and attention of an entire kingdom now sat alone in rooms that felt more like a luxurious prison. Every meal was brought by silent servants, every request filtered through security personnel. The phone calls she was permitted to make were monitored, the letters she wrote were read before being sent, and her every movement was tracked and recorded. Isabella's mental state began to deteriorate rapidly under this pressure. She had always been a social creature, drawing energy from interactions with family and friends. The sudden isolation, combined with the shock of her family's alleged crimes, created a psychological prison that proved harder to bear than the physical restrictions placed upon her. Dr. Harrison Webb, the royal physician, was called to examine the Queen after servants reported that she had not eaten in 2 days and had been heard crying throughout the night. His assessment was deeply concerning. Isabella was showing signs of severe emotional distress that could quickly escalate into a complete mental breakdown if not properly addressed. Your Majesty, Dr. Webb reported to King Alexander, the Queen is in a fragile psychological state. The combination of shock, isolation, and uncertainty about her future is taking a severe toll on her mental health. She needs emotional support and human connection, or I fear for her well-being. Alexander found himself caught between his duties as a king and his feelings as a husband. Every instinct told him to comfort Isabella, to provide the support and reassurance she desperately needed. But his advisors warned that showing too much sympathy could be interpreted as weakness, particularly if evidence emerged that implicated her in the conspiracy. The political pressure was immense. Parliament was demanding answers about how such an extensive betrayal could have gone undetected for years. Foreign governments were questioning the stability of Valdoria's leadership. Military commanders were requesting emergency sessions to assess potential security threats. The media was treating the story as the scandal of the century, with hourly updates and endless speculation about what would happen next. General Harrison Price, the kingdom's top military advisor, painted a particularly dire picture during an emergency cabinet meeting. Your Majesty, we have credible intelligence that enemy agents are already moving to exploit this situation. They see the arrest of the Montclairs as evidence of internal weakness and may be planning to test our resolve with military provocations. We need to present a united front, which means making difficult decisions about the Queen's status. The implication was clear. As long as Isabella's loyalty remained in question, she represented a potential security risk that the kingdom could not afford during such a volatile period. Some advisors began quietly suggesting that Alexander should consider divorce proceedings, both to protect the crown's reputation and to eliminate any lingering doubts about divided loyalties within the royal family. But Alexander was not ready to abandon his marriage without absolute proof of Isabella's guilt. Despite everything, he still remembered the woman who had stood beside him during the devastating earthquake that had struck the kingdom 15 years earlier, working tirelessly to coordinate relief efforts and comfort grieving families. He recalled her dedication during the economic crisis that had threatened to bankrupt the royal treasury, when she had voluntarily given up her personal allowances to help fund emergency social programs. These memories made it impossible for him to simply write off their relationship without giving her a chance to prove her innocence. However, he also understood that his personal feelings could not be allowed to compromise the security and stability of the kingdom he had sworn to protect. The solution Alexander chose was both pragmatic and painful. Isabella would be allowed to remain in the palace, but under strict supervision and with severely limited privileges. She would be given the opportunity to cooperate fully with the investigation and demonstrate her innocence through her actions rather than her words. If she proved trustworthy, their marriage might survive this crisis. If evidence emerged of her involvement in the conspiracy, she would face the same consequences as the rest of her family. This decision satisfied neither his advisors, who wanted a complete break with the Montclair family, nor Isabella herself, who felt she was being treated like a criminal despite her proclaimed innocence.
We must remain
But it represented
strong
Alexander's
for the
attempt to
sake of our
balance his
duty
duties
and
as a
those who look
monarch
to
with his
us.
commitments as a husband, even as both roles seemed to be pulling him in opposite directions. As the second day of the crisis drew to a close, the full magnitude of the challenge facing King Alexander became clear. He had successfully moved against the immediate threat posed by the Montclair conspiracy, but in doing so, he had created new problems that would test both his leadership and his character in ways he had never imagined. The kingdom was divided, his marriage was in crisis, and his enemies, both foreign and domestic, were positioning themselves to exploit any sign of weakness. The man who had ruled for over 4 decades with relative stability now faced the greatest challenge of his reign, with the stakes nothing less than the future of the kingdom itself. The third week following the Montclair arrests brought a development that would change everything: the discovery of Queen Isabella's private diary. Hidden behind a loose stone in her personal library, The leather-bound journal contained 5 years of daily entries that painted a picture far more complex than anyone had imagined. Intelligence Director James Morrison delivered the diary personally to King Alexander, his expression grave as he placed the evidence on the royal desk. The book fell open to pages covered in Isabella's distinctive handwriting, entries that would either absolve her completely or damn her forever. Alexander read with growing amazement as the truth finally emerged. Isabella had not been an innocent bystander in her family's conspiracy. She had been actively working against it. The diary revealed that she had discovered her brother Ferdinand's treacherous activities nearly 2 years earlier and had been secretly gathering evidence to expose the plot. The entries painted a heartbreaking picture of a woman torn between loyalty to her family and duty to her husband and kingdom. Isabella had documented meeting after meeting where she had tried to convince her relatives to abandon their dangerous scheme. She had recorded her growing horror as she realized the extent of their betrayal and their determination to proceed regardless of her objections. March 15th. Ferdinand showed me documents today that made my blood run cold, read one entry. They are planning to move against Alexander within the year. I begged him to reconsider, reminded him of all the king has done for our family, but he insisted that Alexander has become too independent and must be replaced. I fear I am the only one who can stop this madness. But how can I betray my own blood, even to save the crown? Another entry from 6 months later revealed the agony of her position. Father presented me with an ultimatum today. Either I help them by providing palace intelligence, or they will proceed without my cooperation and likely face execution when they are caught. He believes my involvement would provide cover for the family and increase their chances of success. I told him I needed time to think, but I know I can never participate in such treachery. Yet if I expose them, I destroy my entire family. Alexander deserves to know, but will he ever forgive me for keeping this secret so long? The final entries were the most revealing of all. Isabella had been planning to confess everything to Alexander just days before his intelligence service uncovered the plot independently. She had gathered copies of documents, recorded conversations, and prepared a complete dossier that would have provided the king with everything he needed to stop the conspiracy. I cannot live with this burden any longer, she had written just 1 week before the arrests. Tomorrow I will tell Alexander everything. I pray he can understand why I waited so long to act. I was not protecting my family's conspiracy. I was trying to find a way to stop them without destroying the people I love. But I see now that some betrayals are too great to be handled quietly. The kingdom must come first, even before family. The diary also revealed details that the intelligence service had missed. Isabella's sister Catherine had been blackmailed into participation by threats against her children. Several other family members had been coerced rather than willing conspirators. Most importantly, the diary identified Count Wilhelm as the true mastermind who had manipulated his own children and grandchildren into serving his ambitions. Alexander felt a complex mix of relief, guilt, and renewed love as he read his wife's private thoughts. The woman he had suspected of betrayal had actually been trying to protect both her family and his kingdom, caught in an impossible situation that would have broken most people. Her apparent disinterest in politics had been a careful performance designed to prevent her family from suspecting that she knew about their activities. Dr. Webb's assessment took on new meaning in light of these revelations. Isabella's emotional breakdown had not been the result of shock at discovering her family's crimes. It had been the culmination of 2 years of carrying an unbearable secret while trying desperately to find a solution that would save everyone she loved. Alexander immediately ordered Isabella's release from house arrest and rushed to find her in the royal quarters. He discovered her sitting by the window, staring out at the gardens where protesters still gathered daily to demand either her family's freedom or their execution. She looked fragile and hollow, as if the weeks of isolation and stress had drained the life from her. "Isabella," he said softly, causing her to turn toward him with startled eyes. "I know the truth now. I know what you were trying to do." She studied his face carefully, searching for signs of anger or condemnation. When she saw only love and regret, she finally broke down completely, sobbing with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "I'm so sorry, Alexander," she whispered through her tears. "I should have told you immediately when I discovered what they were planning. I thought I could convince them to stop, that I could save both my family and the crown without anyone getting hurt. I was naive and foolish." Alexander gathered her in his arms, feeling the full weight of his own mistakes. He had doubted the woman who had sacrificed everything to protect his kingdom, had treated her like a potential enemy when she had been his greatest ally. The guilt was overwhelming. "You were protecting everyone you loved in an impossible situation," he said gently. "I should have trusted you. Should have given you a chance to explain before making assumptions about your loyalty. Can you forgive me for doubting you?" The reconciliation between the king and queen provided a moment of personal healing, but it also created new challenges for the kingdom. Public opinion remained sharply divided about the Montclair family, and Isabella's vindication raised uncomfortable questions about the fate of her relatives who had been caught up in Count Wilhelm's scheme. The diary evidence revealed that several family members had been victims rather than willing conspirators. Catherine's participation had been coerced through threats to her children. Young Lord Timothy Montclair had been deceived about the nature of his assignments, believing he was conducting legitimate diplomatic work. Even Duke Ferdinand had initially resisted his father's plans before being gradually manipulated into compliance. This new information forced Alexander to reconsider his approach to justice. While Count Wilhelm clearly deserved the full penalty for high treason, the cases of other family members were more complex. How does a kingdom balance justice with mercy? How does a king punish betrayal while acknowledging that some betrayers were themselves victims? Attorney General Patricia Lynch advised a nuanced approach. "Your Majesty, the evidence clearly shows varying degrees of culpability among the defendants. Count Wilhelm orchestrated the entire conspiracy and must face the maximum penalty. Duke Ferdinand willingly participated in treasonous activities, though under family pressure. Lady Catherine and the others were coerced participants who deserve consideration for their circumstances." The decision Alexander made would define his legacy as much as his response to the original conspiracy. He chose to show measured mercy, demonstrating the kind of wisdom that had made him a respected leader for over 4 decades. Count Wilhelm faced charges of high treason with a potential death sentence. Duke Ferdinand would be tried for conspiracy and face significant prison time, but would not be executed. Lady Catherine and the other coerced participants would face lesser charges with opportunities for rehabilitation and eventual restoration to limited royal favor. This balanced approach satisfied neither the hardliners who wanted maximum punishment for all conspirators nor the Montclair supporters who wanted complete exoneration. But it demonstrated that Alexander was capable of justice tempered with understanding, punishment balanced with compassion. The public reaction to Isabella's vindication was dramatic and polarizing. Those who had supported the royal family felt vindicated in their loyalty and praised the queen's courage in secretly working to protect the kingdom. However, those who had supported the Montclairs felt betrayed by what they saw as Isabella's treachery against her own family. Duchess Margaret, Ferdinand's wife, gave another emotional press conference that highlighted the complexity of the situation. "I understand that my husband made terrible mistakes," she said through tears, "but he was manipulated by his own father, a man he had trusted and obeyed his entire life. Queen Isabella chose to protect the crown over her family, and while I understand her loyalty to her husband, I cannot forgive her for the destruction of innocent lives." The Duchess's words struck a chord with many who understood the agonizing choice Isabella had faced. Some saw her as a hero who had put duty above personal loyalty. Others viewed her as a traitor who had destroyed her own family to protect her position as queen. The kingdom remained deeply divided about both the conspiracy itself and the royal family's handling of it. Prince Marcus, the crown prince, found himself in a particularly difficult position. As Isabella's son and the future king, he had to navigate the political implications of his mother's vindication while also dealing with the personal trauma of learning that his grandfather and uncle had tried to overthrow his father. His public statements were carefully measured, supporting both his parents while expressing regret for the pain the entire situation had caused the kingdom. Princess Elena chose a different approach, making an emotional public appearance where she praised her mother's courage and called for national unity. "My mother faced an impossible choice and chose to protect our kingdom even though it meant terrible consequences for people she loved," Elena declared. "That is the kind of courage and sacrifice that defines true leadership, and I am proud to be her daughter." The princess's words began to shift public opinion slightly in Isabella's favor, as many citizens began to appreciate the personal cost of her decision to expose her family's conspiracy. However, the damage to national unity was severe, and it would take years for the kingdom to fully heal from the crisis. As the immediate aftermath of the revelation began to settle, King Alexander faced the challenge of rebuilding trust both within his family and throughout his kingdom. The Montclair conspiracy had exposed vulnerabilities in the monarchy that would require fundamental changes to prevent future betrayals. More importantly, it had tested the very foundations of his marriage and his reign in ways that would have lasting consequences for years to come. The royal couple had survived their greatest crisis, but they emerged changed by the experience. Alexander had learned the danger of assumptions and the importance of trust. Isabella had discovered that sometimes protecting the people you love requires making choices that cause them pain. Together, they would have to rebuild not just their marriage, but their kingdom's faith in the institution they represented. 6 months after the Montclair conspiracy was exposed, the kingdom of Valdoria faced an unexpected new crisis that would test everything King Alexander and Queen Isabella had learned from their ordeal. The trials of the conspirators were proceeding through the courts. Public protests had largely subsided, and the royal family seemed to be finding its way back to stability. Then, Lady Catherine Montclair made a devastating public confession that changed everything once again. Standing before a packed courthouse during her sentencing hearing, Isabella's sister revealed a secret that had been buried for 28 years. In a voice that barely rose above a whisper but carried to every corner of the silent courtroom, Catherine confessed that she had been having an affair with King Alexander before his marriage to Isabella, and that Prince Marcus might not be the king's biological son. The courtroom erupted in chaos as reporters scrambled to capture every word of the shocking revelation. Catherine continued speaking even as bailiffs tried to restore order, her voice growing stronger as she unburdened herself of decades of guilt and deception. "I loved Alexander first," she declared, tears streaming down her face. "We were together for 2 years before political necessity forced him to marry my sister instead of me. When Isabella became pregnant with Marcus just months after the wedding, I knew there was a possibility that the child was mine and Alexander's, conceived during our final encounter before the marriage. The implications were staggering. If Prince Marcus was not King Alexander's biological son, then the entire line of succession was illegitimate. The crown prince, who had spent his life preparing to inherit the throne, might have no legal right to rule. The monarchy itself could face a constitutional crisis that would make the Montclair conspiracy look like a minor scandal." Catherine's confession was motivated by a complex mixture of revenge, guilt, and desperate love. She was facing 5 years in prison for her role in her father's conspiracy. Her children had been ostracized at school, and her husband was demanding a divorce. Destroying the royal family seemed like the only way to make them pay for the destruction of her own life. But her revelation also carried the weight of genuine emotion that had been suppressed for decades. Catherine had been forced to watch the man she loved marry her sister, had endured years of family gatherings where she had to pretend that seeing Alexander with Isabella didn't tear her apart. The conspiracy had given her hope that Ferdinand might become king, and she could finally have her revenge against the sister who had taken everything she wanted. King Alexander received the news while meeting with foreign diplomats about trade agreements. His private secretary, Thomas Wright, entered the conference room and whispered urgently in the king's ear. The color drained from Alexander's face as he absorbed the implications of Catherine's confession. "Gentlemen, I'm afraid we'll need to postpone this meeting," Alexander announced to the confused diplomats. "A matter of urgent national importance has arisen that requires my immediate attention." Within an hour, the palace was in full crisis mode again. The same advisors who had managed the Montclair conspiracy found themselves facing an even more complex challenge. How do you protect a monarchy when the legitimacy of the heir apparent has been called into question by someone with intimate knowledge of the royal family's secrets? Attorney General Lynch was blunt in her assessment. "Your Majesty, Lady Catherine's claims, whether true or false, have created a legal and political nightmare. Every enemy of the crown will use this to question Prince Marcus's right to inherit. We need to address this immediately and definitively." The most obvious solution was a DNA test that could either confirm or refute Catherine's claims. But even this seemingly simple step carried enormous risks. If the test confirmed that Marcus was not Alexander's biological son, it would create a constitutional crisis that could destabilize the entire kingdom. If it proved Alexander was the father, Catherine's credibility would be destroyed, but the very fact that such a test was necessary would damage the royal family's reputation. Queen Isabella's reaction to Catherine's confession was a mixture of rage, betrayal, and profound hurt. She had always known that Alexander had relationships before their marriage, but she had never suspected that one of them had been with her own sister. The revelation that Catherine had been carrying this secret throughout their entire marriage felt like a violation that went beyond mere infidelity. How could she do this? Isabella demanded during a private meeting with Alexander in his study. She has been in my life for 28 years, attending family dinners, playing with my children, pretending to be my loving sister, all while knowing she might have had a child with my husband. Alexander struggled to find words that could provide comfort without minimizing the seriousness of the situation. Isabella, I need you to know that what Catherine and I had ended completely when I married you. There was no affair after our wedding, no ongoing deception about my feelings or my commitment to you and our family. But there might have been deception about our son, Isabella replied, her voice breaking. Marcus might not be your child, Alexander. Our entire family might be built on a lie. The impact on Prince Marcus himself was devastating. The 27-year-old crown prince had built his entire identity around his future role as king. He was beloved by the people, respected by international leaders, and had spent decades preparing to inherit the responsibilities of the crown. Now he faced the possibility that everything he had worked toward might be taken away because of his mother's sister's confession. Marcus requested a private meeting with his parents, and the conversation that followed was one of the most difficult in the royal family's history. The young man who had always carried himself with quiet confidence looked shaken and uncertain as he struggled to process the implications of Catherine's revelation. I need to know the truth, Marcus said firmly. Not just for myself, but for the kingdom. If there's any possibility that my claim to the throne is illegitimate, we have to address it now rather than allowing it to create problems later. Alexander was struck by his son's maturity and wisdom in handling such a personal crisis. Whether or not Marcus was his biological child, the young man was demonstrating the kind of leadership qualities that would serve the kingdom well. Whatever the test reveals, Alexander assured him, you will always be my son in every way that matters. Biology doesn't determine character, and you have proven yourself worthy of the crown through your actions, not your genetics. The decision to proceed with DNA testing was made jointly by Alexander, Isabella, and Marcus, despite the risks involved. They understood that the uncertainty would be more damaging to the monarchy in the long run than whatever truth the tests might reveal. The process was conducted in absolute secrecy, with samples taken by the royal physician and analyzed by a private laboratory that specialized in high-profile cases. The 3-day wait for results was an agony of uncertainty for the entire royal family. During those 3 days, speculation in the media reached a fever pitch. Every aspect of Catherine's confession was analyzed and debated by experts and pundits. Photos from 28 years ago were scrutinized for evidence of a relationship between Alexander and Catherine. Palace insiders were questioned about whether they had observed any suspicious interactions between the future king and his bride's sister. The stress took a severe toll on all family members. Isabella barely slept, spending her nights pacing the royal quarters and questioning every memory she had of her sister's behavior over the past 3 decades. Alexander threw himself into state business with unusual intensity, trying to maintain some semblance of normal governance, while privately wondering whether his son was actually his son. Princess Elena provided crucial support during this period, setting aside her own hurt and confusion to help her family stay united. She organized private family meals, encouraged honest communication, and reminded everyone that their love for each other should not depend on the results of any test. We've been a family for 27 years, Elena told her parents and brother. 3 days of uncertainty don't erase decades of love and shared experiences. Whatever we learn, we'll face it together. The results, when they finally arrived, were unambiguous. Prince Marcus was definitively King Alexander's biological son. The DNA analysis showed a 99.97% probability of paternity, completely refuting Catherine's claims. The relief was overwhelming, but it was tempered by the realization of what Catherine's false confession had cost the family. She had used their worst fears against them, weaponizing uncertainty about paternity to cause maximum emotional damage. The woman who had already betrayed the crown through the conspiracy had now betrayed her sister's family through deliberate lies designed to destroy them. Alexander's response to Catherine's deception was swift and uncompromising. Her sentence for participation in the conspiracy was extended to the maximum allowed by law. More importantly, she was permanently banished from the kingdom, stripped of her citizenship, and forbidden from any contact with the royal family for the rest of her life. There are some betrayals that go beyond forgiveness, Alexander announced in his official statement. Lady Catherine has deliberately attempted to destroy the stability of our monarchy and the emotional well-being of her own family through lies and deception. Such actions have consequences that extend beyond legal punishment. The public reaction to the DNA test results and Catherine's banishment was largely supportive of the royal family. Many citizens were impressed by the king and queen's willingness to subject themselves to scientific scrutiny to preserve the integrity of the succession. Prince Marcus's approval ratings actually increased as people admired his mature handling of such a personal crisis. However, the entire episode had taken a toll on the royal family's emotional reserves that would take time to heal. The Montclair conspiracy had tested their political judgment and personal loyalties. Catherine's false paternity claims had attacked the most fundamental bonds of family trust and identity. Isabella found it particularly difficult to recover from her sister's ultimate betrayal. She had forgiven Catherine's involvement in the conspiracy as a result of their father's manipulation and coercion. But the false paternity confession was a deliberate act of cruelty that had no justification beyond revenge and spite. "I keep wondering what else she lied about over the years," Isabella confided to Alexander one evening. "How many times did she sit at our dinner table, play with our children, offer comfort during difficult times, all while planning ways to hurt us? I don't know how to trust my own memories anymore." The experience taught the royal family important lessons about the price of public service and the vulnerability that comes with power. They had learned that enemies could emerge from within their own circle, that family bonds provided no guarantee of loyalty, and that even the most private aspects of their lives could be weaponized against them. But they had also discovered the strength that comes from facing crises together with honesty and courage. Their marriage had survived both conspiracy and false accusations. Their son had proven his worthiness to inherit the crown not through genetics, but through character. Their kingdom had remained stable despite unprecedented challenges to the monarchy's legitimacy. As the fourth chapter of their crisis drew to a close, King Alexander and Queen Isabella faced the future with a hard-earned understanding of both the costs and the rewards of their positions. They had been tested in ways they never could have imagined, but they had emerged stronger and more united than ever before. 2 years after the Montclair conspiracy and Catherine's false paternity claims, the kingdom of Valdoria had settled into a new equilibrium. The trials were complete, the guilty had been sentenced, and the royal family had emerged from their ordeal with a deeper understanding of both the burdens and the privileges of their position. But the true measure of how profoundly these events had changed them would come during an unexpected international crisis that tested everything they had learned. The crisis began with a simple diplomatic dinner that was meant to celebrate improved relations with the neighboring kingdom of Astoria. King Alexander and Queen Isabella were hosting President Elena Vasquez and her delegation for negotiations that could lead to the most significant trade agreement in both nations' histories. The evening was proceeding smoothly when Alexander received an urgent message that would transform a routine diplomatic event into a matter of life and death. Intelligence Director Morrison approached the king during the cocktail hour with news that sent chills through the palace. Asturian military forces had suddenly mobilized along the border, and intercepts suggested that President Vasquez's visit was actually cover for a planned invasion. The woman, smiling and making pleasant conversation in the palace ballroom, was apparently preparing to launch a surprise attack that could devastate Valdoria within hours. The old Alexander might have reacted with immediate suspicion and aggressive countermeasures. But the king, who had learned painful lessons about assumptions and trust, chose a different path. Rather than confronting Vasquez publicly or mobilizing his own forces, he quietly activated emergency protocols while maintaining the appearance of normal diplomatic proceedings. Queen Isabella proved instrumental in this delicate balancing act. Drawing on skills she had developed during her family's conspiracy, she engaged President Vasquez in seemingly innocent conversation while carefully observing for signs of deception or hostile intent. The woman who had once felt guilty about doubting her own family now used those hard-earned instincts to protect her kingdom. President Vasquez seems genuinely committed to peaceful cooperation, Isabella reported to Alexander during a brief private moment. Either she's an exceptional actress, or our intelligence might be incomplete. I suggest we proceed with caution, but avoid actions that could trigger unnecessary conflict. This measured response proved crucial when additional intelligence revealed the true situation. The Asturian military mobilization was not preparation for invasion, but rather a response to credible threats from their own hostile neighbor to the south. President Vasquez had not informed Alexander about the mobilization because she feared it might be interpreted as a threat to Valdoria and derail the peace negotiations she desperately needed. The revelation highlighted how profoundly the royal couple's approach to crisis management had evolved. Instead of allowing fear and suspicion to drive their decisions, they had chosen to gather more information while maintaining diplomatic flexibility. The conspiracy and its aftermath had taught them that initial impressions could be misleading and that patience often revealed truths that hasty action might obscure. Prince Marcus played a crucial role in resolving the crisis by proposing a solution that demonstrated remarkable diplomatic sophistication. Rather than simply clarifying the misunderstanding, he suggested that Valdoria offer military assistance to help Astoria defend against the southern threat. This gesture would strengthen both kingdoms while establishing Marcus as a leader capable of turning potential conflicts into opportunities for cooperation. We have learned that our greatest strength comes not from isolation but from principled alliances, Marcus declared during the emergency cabinet meeting. Astoria's security directly affects our own, and helping them defend themselves serves both our interests and our values. Alexander was struck by his son's wisdom and confidence. The young man who had faced questions about his legitimacy had emerged as a leader whose authority was based not on bloodline, but on merit and judgment. The crisis had become an opportunity for Marcus to demonstrate his readiness to inherit the crown. The successful resolution of the Asturian crisis marked a turning point in how the international community viewed Valdoria's royal family. Other nations began to recognize that King Alexander and Queen Isabella had emerged from their domestic troubles as more skilled and trustworthy leaders. Their willingness to question their own assumptions and seek deeper understanding of complex situations made them valuable allies and formidable opponents. However, the most significant changes were personal rather than political. The royal marriage had been fundamentally transformed by their shared ordeals. Alexander and Isabella no longer took each other's loyalty for granted, but actively worked to maintain the trust they had nearly lost. Their relationship had evolved from comfortable partnership to conscious commitment. We know now that marriage, like leadership, requires constant vigilance and deliberate choice, Isabella reflected during one of their evening walks through the palace gardens. We can't simply assume that love will overcome every challenge. We have to choose each other every day, especially when circumstances make that choice difficult. Alexander agreed, understanding that their marriage had gained strength precisely because it had been tested so severely. We've learned that the greatest threats often come from those closest to us, but also that the greatest sources of strength come from the same place. Trust must be earned continuously, not just granted once. The lessons learned during the conspiracy extended far beyond their personal relationship. Alexander implemented comprehensive reforms to the intelligence services, creating multiple oversight mechanisms to prevent future security failures. The royal household was restructured to limit access to sensitive information and ensure that no single family or faction could accumulate dangerous levels of influence. Queen Isabella established new protocols for royal family interactions that balanced openness with security. Family members would continue to be welcomed at court, but their access to state secrets would be carefully controlled. Love and trust would be maintained, but verified through appropriate safeguards. Most importantly, both Alexander and Isabella committed to more active involvement in the daily governance of the kingdom. The conspiracy had succeeded partly because they had delegated too much authority to people they trusted without maintaining adequate oversight. Going forward, they would remain more directly engaged in all aspects of royal administration. The impact on their children was equally profound. Prince Marcus had developed a deep appreciation for the complexities of leadership and the importance of questioning conventional wisdom. His experience with false paternity claims had taught him that even the most fundamental aspects of identity could be challenged, but that true authority came from character rather than circumstance. Princess Elena emerged as a powerful advocate for transparency and accountability in government. Her mother's experience of being unjustly suspected had convinced her that royal institutions needed to be more open to public scrutiny while remaining secure enough to function effectively. The broader kingdom also underwent significant changes as a result of the crisis. Citizens had witnessed their royal family's vulnerability and humanity in unprecedented ways. Rather than diminishing respect for the monarchy, this transparency had actually strengthened public support by demonstrating that their leaders were capable of growth, self-reflection, and genuine accountability. Public opinion polls conducted 2 years after the conspiracy showed higher approval ratings for the royal family than they had enjoyed in decades. Citizens appreciated leaders who could acknowledge mistakes, learn from failures, and emerge stronger from adversity. The monarchy had become more relatable without becoming less dignified. The Montclair family's legacy proved more complex than anyone had anticipated. Count Wilhelm died in prison, unrepentant to the end, and convinced that his actions had been justified by what he saw as Alexander's incompetence. Duke Ferdinand served his sentence quietly and emerged as a broken man who posed no further threat to anyone. Lady Catherine's banishment proved to be a form of mercy in disguise. Removed from the political pressures and family dynamics that had contributed to her destructive choices, she eventually found peace working with charitable organizations in her country of exile. Her false paternity claims were revealed to have been motivated not just by revenge, but by genuine mental health issues that had gone untreated for years. The surviving Montclair family members who had been coerced into the conspiracy were gradually rehabilitated and restored to limited royal favor. Their presence served as a reminder that redemption was possible even after serious failures, but also that trust once broken required years of patient effort to rebuild. As King Alexander entered the final phase of his reign, he reflected on how the conspiracy and its aftermath had ultimately strengthened both his family and his kingdom. The crisis had stripped away comfortable illusions and forced everyone involved to confront difficult truths about loyalty, power, and responsibility. Perhaps we needed this trial, he mused to Isabella one evening as they watched the sunset from their private balcony. We had become too comfortable, too trusting, too confident that our good intentions would protect us from serious threats. Now we know better, but we also know that we can survive even our worst nightmares if we face them with courage and honesty. Queen Isabella nodded, thinking about the woman she had become through these trials. She was no longer the somewhat naive princess who had focused primarily on charitable work and cultural events. The conspiracy had revealed her capacity for both investigation and leadership, skills she never knew she possessed. I'm proud of who we've become, she said quietly. Not just despite what we've endured, but because of it. We're better rulers, better parents, and better partners because we've learned that real strength comes from acknowledging our vulnerabilities rather than pretending they don't exist. The Kingdom of Valdoria entered a new era with leaders who understood that security and trust must be constantly maintained rather than simply assumed. They had learned that even the closest relationships require vigilance, that power corrupts gradually rather than suddenly, and that the greatest threats to any institution come from complacency and overconfidence. But they had also learned that love, loyalty, and integrity can survive even the most devastating betrayals if they are grounded in honest communication and shared commitment to something larger than personal interest. The royal family had emerged from their trials not unscathed, but unbroken, ready to serve their people with wisdom earned through suffering and strength forged in the fires of genuine adversity. As the sun set on this chapter of Valdorian history, King Alexander and Queen Isabella faced the future with clear eyes and strong hearts, knowing that they had been tested in every way that mattered and had proven themselves worthy of the trust their people placed in them. The conspiracy that had threatened to destroy them had instead transformed them into leaders capable of facing whatever challenges the future might bring.